that they will withdraw variation of condition 23 from this application. So what's in front of you now is the proposed variations to conditions 3 and condition 5, which we are content can be dealt with as a section 73 variation application. And then if they want to pursue the change to 23, that will have to be the subject of a separate application that will come in, but we will be proceeding on the basis of it's a variation of conditions 3 and 5, which, looking at the report, and I'm sure Mrs. Househander will correct me if I'm wrong, is permanent permission for the temporary yurt structures, which is condition 3, and the field kitchen catering service, food and drink to be added within the polytunnels. That's correct. So that's what we're considering. Thank you, Chair and members. Right.
Questions still? Yeah, yes. Professor Taylor.
Yeah, I would like to ask the government, without the, I mean, would you have the same opinion?
The officer report indicates that the changes to the other two conditions are not acceptable as well. The base, the condition 3, which requires there's a 10-year restriction to be removed on the yurts. There is some debate, I think, around whether or not, as Councillor Brazil suggested, whether or not that vote has already sailed, if you like, in terms of the principle of the development has been accepted by other developments. Question is around whether or not the permanent situation of the yurts, as opposed to a 10-year temporary permission, whether that has the same impact, like. So the officer report indicates that it would have a negative impact, and therefore recommends that that variation is not agreed. Members to maybe to think about that as an issue. With regard to the use in the polytunnels, that the officer report also indicates that it is not acceptable on the basis that that use could potentially lead to disturbances. Again, members will need to make their mind up about that. And yeah, so the officer report recommends refusal on all 3 conditions.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move. Get to next. Please, would you like to come up? That's right. I've done really serious. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Slide 1. Chairman, councillors and officers, I'm one of the full-time residents that live close to the High Nature Centre. The case officer's report sets out clearly many reasons why the current application is refused, with which we concur. I'd like to share some pictures of the High Nature site, highlight our concerns with the planning application. Slide 1 is an aerial picture that shows the impact that High Nature has, reducing the rural appearance of the area. Highlighted in yellow on the picture are 2 static caravans, as well as a motorhome built. Although planning did allow for 1 static caravan to be used as a site office before the roundhouse was constructed, it is believed that these have been used for residential purposes. Slide 2 is a High Nature layout plan, which shows that the proposed additional tent area served and bed will potentially double the usage of the site back to the area. This is before the catering outside visitors. Slide 3 shows the close proximity of the site, circled in red, neighbouring properties, its position within the coastal AONB. Increased noise in the evening through scaling up the activities, a major concern to neighbours. This is otherwise a quiet area, and any noise increase is impactful. Slide 4. This shows pictures of previous jazz evening, with amplified music prohibited, food in the polytunnel. Evening events such as this are a major concern to neighbours, especially if held outside in good weather. It is feared that permitting a field kitchen dining service lead to evening activities after 7 p.m. This is expressly prohibited in existing planning. Slide 5 shows additional camping already taking place together with the helicopter landing in the car park area. Many of these activities are outside the scope of the original planning, which aimed to prevent noise, disturbance, amenity, tranquility, landscape. Many of the aspirations of the original application, such as providing sustainable local employment, artisan working spaces, etc., are being met. We do not see how the current application will change this without severe impact on tranquility or the rural appearance of the area. Thus, any proposed variation of the existing conditions would be reviewed. As the applicant has shown, without regard to many of the existing planning conditions, we have little confidence in their ability to do so in future. Only this last weekend, neighbours woke in the area by music being played.
Any question? Present.
Yeah, could we go back to the first slide, please? So, Mr. Miller, when you look at that, what's the main thing of the polytunnels though? But of course, they've already got. So, I'm just sort of, you put that up there as a page. So, what are you saying are the problems here?
I'm highlighting the impact that it has on the visual appearance of the rural area, the fact that there are other activities going on there which aren't.
Yeah, I mean, so the 4 years, well, in fact, the 5 years that you can see in the background, do you think that those are detrimental to the visual impact there?
I don't have a particular problem with 5 years.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. Can I just ask you, that the main sort of areas of when you might be feeling that things are being breached, you haven't actually complained of the activities, just generally during the summer months?
Mainly during the summer periods.
Any other further questions? No? Right, okay. We'll move on to supporter. Catherine.
I
Need to make
also wanted
it red, lights on, that's fine.
it's red.
Yes.
I also wanted to confirm that I've taken the gentleman's advice about withdrawing the occasional camper. Firstly, I just want to say a huge thank you to the District Council for giving me the opportunity to redevelop and diversify Wayfield nurseries. So much has happened since I stood here 10 years ago. In 2009, I discovered Wayfield, an old rundown plant nursery in need of some investment. Over the last 13 years, myself, family, friends, and a team of amazing employees and volunteers have transformed the place from a derelict plant nursery into an ecologically diverse and socially inclusive community hub. Planting trees is the most efficient solution to fight climate change. We have planted more than 2,000 trees on the 5-acre plot, protected and enhanced the biodiversity and wildlife habitat by carefully managing our grassland, sowing wildflowers and allowing hedgerows to grow, and improve soil health through no-dig organic grow practices. All waste is reduced and recycled, including humanure, which is carefully managed to feed our fruit trees. All of this enables ecosystem services to flourish. From a business viability perspective, we're still going strong after 10 years. The yurts are very popular and provide revenue to employ myself, my husband, our manager, and casual seasonal staff, and self-employed contractors when needed. At present, there are 3 people on the payroll, 4 casual staff, 2 growers, 2 volunteers, and our brilliant young chef, Geordie, today. Local people also use the centre to deliver their workshops and courses. As you can see from the letters of support, we are deeply supported by a substantial part of the local community, especially young working families. The community would suffer greatly if High Nature was not to continue, particularly vulnerable members. Last year, our sister company, High Nature Care, was awarded another 10,000 lottery grant to continue our social outreach. Over the last 5 years, we have employed 14 workshop leaders to provide wellbeing activities, various groups, including young carers, autistic and Down syndrome kids, and women suffering domestic abuse. We're also working with local medical centres as part of a social prescribing initiative, where doctors can refer patients to our services via the Joy app. Next. I wish you'd been able to visit us on Monday to see what a magical place we've created. We've all worked so hard to get to this point, and there is so much more to do. It would be devastating for High Nature not to be able to continue and develop. So many people depend on its existence, my family included.
Thank you. Questions, anybody? Hodgson.
Can I just, thank you for your brochure, really interesting.
Thank you.
So in terms of the number of people, I don't know if it's maybe just asking this off your head,
Yeah.
the kind of numbers that you would expect to get each year in terms of people that, you know, you're giving kind of an education and an opportunity to come to you, and what kind of numbers you'd like to say, but I would say we probably run about between 8 and 10 sessions throughout the year, and I'd say the groups vary depending on which organisation we're working with, between kind of 6 to maybe 15 children, young adults or children, or or adults coming through from various organisations. That's from the social. That's the social outreach work. I think that's what you're asking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you for the presentation. Having listened to both yourself and the previous objector, would it be fair to say, have you received visits from council officers, then enforcement officers? Have you had issues? And if you have, do you feel that you were able to mitigate those incidents in future? I'm quite keen to understand what the problems have been, as far as you're concerned as the owner.
We've never had any officer come and deal with any noise complaints. There has been the odd event that might have upset the neighbours, but to be fair, I don't think it's any different to any other business or family living in the area. Like we've got Gara Rock down the road. It's wedding season. You know, there are weddings, there are anniversaries, there's the odd birthday party, but you're not talking about something going on every weekend. The enforcement officer has been to see us because of the tent. And obviously I've just removed that bit, so I presume that's relevant.
Any more questions? Well, I'm going to ask a question in respect of, I've had people come to me and saying about noise at night. I assume you will try to ask you to give a straight answer.
Yeah.
How often would that be that you have something that's going on later than perhaps it should have done?
It's extremely rare. You know, I've been there this is my 14th year now.
Yeah.
And I would say we probably had like a birthday party or an anniversary celebration probably like once every 2 years. It's really not much. And actually we're only open between May to September anyway. So with all due respect, I do think it's a bit of a disproportional objection.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions? No. Right, we'll move on to Parish Council. Councillor Richard Lawson. Mr. Chairman, councillors, officers. My name is Richard Lawson. I represent today the East Bournemouth Parish Council. We fully endorse all the objections raised in the officer's report and in the report from the council landscape officer. The field area that's now known as High Nature Centre has been farmed for hundreds of years. A few simple polytunnels were erected towards the end of the last century. This changed when the applicant began to develop the yurt camping site. The immediate impact was a massive increase in activity at the site, with noise late into the evening, numbers of cars, camper vans and large vehicles coming and going, light pollution and general disturbance and harm to the character of the area. The current requested variations relate to the application that was brought to the committee 10 years ago. Back then, the committee voiced their concerns as evidenced by the temporary nature of the permission. There were 24 conditions attached. Condition 3 today is an application for permanent status from the temporary status originally granted. Since 2012, and despite conditions in force, residents have had the cause to complain to the applicant and lacking any helpful response have resorted to contacting the council's enforcement team. Many of these complaints relate to issues referred to in the officer's report and Mr. Miller's presentation. The overriding concern is that if you grant planning permission for variation to conditions 3, 5, and of course 23, now the development will add significantly to the level of activity. There is simply no demonstrable need in East Bournemouth that would justify granting permission, and the parish council urges you to refuse the planning. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Hodgson.
I'm also a councillor. I'm very aware of the situation with regard to anxiety in young people. I also chair a youth group, which has 550 kids, a youth events. And I look at this development maybe through that lens. And I just wonder, do you recognise any benefits for young people and be able to have a facility that can actually enable them to go somewhere, school holidays, weekends, some of these. But I've never been there. I've never even visited the site because I couldn't find it last time. It was a site visit. But I'm good at that. That must be honest. But I mean, I have kept up, and I'm very aware of what goes on there. And I see some of these facilities as being providing vital opportunity for a lot of young people, otherwise not to do some of these things. So I just asked, can you look at it through that lens, or does anybody else? I'm not trying to corner you. I just think it's something maybe to think about rather than just the quietness of the rural.
Can I answer that?
Please do.
Since I run a personal charitable foundation to aid children and those less fortunate to ourselves, I can actually endorse all of that. However, I think this is really right side, a right activity, wrong side. And what's happened is that it has grown like Topsy, and it had temporary permission 10 years. And during that time, there's been a whole host of things that should not have been, these have taken place. And what we're really saying as a council is it's a wonderful area, but it doesn't deserve what Cat is doing there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you may be interested to hear that as members, we've just had a variation of premises license come through for Port Waterhouse. I believe you were on the parish council when Port Waterhouse application came in. So that was to change a boathouse into a boathouse and 100 seats of venue for parties? What's the touchline?
I've only been on the parish council for 18 months. Suspect I wasn't.
Okay, okay. Well, just to say that what I'm trying to get at is what would you say is the difference between high nature and activity at high nature and Port Waterhouse?
I think the visibility of Port Waters, I have no idea what this August body decided today, but living as I do 200 metres away from Port, I have to say to you, they have had parties, weddings. We don't hear it at all. No music, no nothing. They're well below where we live. Today, we're here to support the residents of the area line who are living 200-300 metres away and all at the same level C. Right, thank you. Any other questions? Well, I'll ask the same question that I asked just now. How many actual real late nights have you had? You can tell me about. Personally, sir, none. I can't tell you that information. I think the information would have come from the council to whom the enforcement officer was sent complaints. Right, thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. Right, thank you very much. All right, then, members, we're open to the wise words of Councillor Brazil, I believe, as board member.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to everyone that's spoken here. And I have to say, you know, I do understand the concerns of local residents. And obviously as a local member, I have to take those on board. And I do. And it is, but I don't just represent them. I mean, I represent the wider community across my patch, and you'll see from the letters of representation that there is a lot of support for this. I'm not going to pretend for one moment that it's perfect, and you know, there are occasions when it's probably done what it shouldn't do. But overall, over the last 10 years, I have to say I'm incredibly proud that I've got this in my patch. It does indeed work as a care social hub for the community and the wider community. I read in the officer report that they're concerned about the economic benefits. There isn't one mention of the social benefits of this problems, and I think that's disappointing. We've got a paper tomorrow coming to executive about health and well-being. Health and well-being and the pilot scheme. This ticks all those boxes. It's exactly the kind of thing that we should be supporting. Now we've heard that the extra tents and caravans have been withdrawn, and I think South London, we agreed that actually the landscape officer was complaining about those. So in fact, the rest of it is the landscape officer's report is in a way is parked on that. So we have a variation condition for a 10-year temporary to 10-year permanent to a permanent. I mean, of course, this is permanent for temporary temporary years. They're not up there all year round. They're only up for about 5 months of the year, if that. So we're not talking about a structure that will be there all year round. And in that, when we passed the condition, it was that it had to prove that it could work. And I would say to you that after 10 years and it's still there, by definition, it is still working. And again, we talk about the economic benefits of support, but what those haven't gone into are the economic benefits that that's brought to the wider community, the workshops, the people that run those workshops, the contractors that come and work there, the occasional labour that work there. There's reports here from the accountant from Ivy Bridge Accounting that talk about that they say here the suggestion that the company is not paying tax and national insurance contributions is wholly incorrect. and is supported by the notes of the accounts. The fact that there's four and a bit £1,000 owing to the PAYE and NIC in those accounts. So to me, I think the economic case is made. I appreciate that some of the idea of having some of the artisans working within the polytunnels themselves has not been as successful as they wanted, and that's partly my understanding is because of the weather, because there's it's either too hot or it's too cold. There aren't many, but it has worked to an extent. We've had furniture. I think you'll see in your document, if you looked at that, we've had furniture, restorers, potters, jewellery, and a number of things. But I think more than anything, it's the social capital that this is worth to my parish. And I have to look, when I'm taking these decisions, and obviously there are people who are against it, and parish councillors against it, which I accept. But I have to look, and I have to say to myself, will my patch be richer or poorer without high nature? And I can definitely say to you that in my view, it will be incredibly much poorer without high nature in my ward. And the young carers, autistic, Down syndrome, battered women, mental health, all those people who come to high nature and benefit so much from it. And although I appreciate that there is a balance to be had here with the neighbouring thing, I think that has been it's been a fantastic experience to see it evolve, and I 100% support it. So in that sense, I do think that we should give it permanent. We're not doing, the reason why, if I'm honest, the reason why we only gave it temporary was because there was a fear that it was going to turn into some kind of traveller camp. That has not been realised by any stretch of the imagination. It is a functioning tourism, eco-tourism business that does incredibly, which is, it pays for itself, and it's still there, which I think is a fantastic achievement for Kat, Top-Down, and their family and friends. The other one was the field kitchen. I appreciate that there may be issues with that, but as I've said, I mean, we've allowed permission for a venue just down the road on the estuary to have a 100-seater venue for weddings, parties, etc. like that. I think it would be rather inconsistent of us if we didn't allow the field kitchen here. And it's not just the evening, obviously, it's field kitchening to provide food and things for communities and groups of people that come there and use the facilities. I think that's probably all I'd like to say. Some of the points that were raised here. I mean, I find it slightly ironic that we talk about Dev 32 here with this. I mean, this is all off grid. It's solar powered. It was way ahead of its time, which is probably why it hasn't think. The showers are solar powered. The yurts all have solar power as far as electric is concerned. I appreciate that the field kitchen itself is not off grid, and that's something that I hope and I think that could be improved upon. I accept that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
I just thought to make one or two comments. I think in terms of the Dev 32, I think what Ms. Harris-Lander was saying is that we're saying they didn't apply. We just didn't have the information to work out why they complied. I think that was that. And whilst I do agree with you that the majority of the greatest concern from the landscape officer, and particularly from the AOB, was to do with the additional camping and camper vans. I don't think I could agree with you that means we set that aside, because they did. I appreciate that you've already said you can't see how, because they're having a second bite of the cherry. but they did still raise concerns regarding the other two conditions. I think I just need to that out.
Thank you, Chairman. Probably one of the few planning committee members that was actually at that original application all those years ago. He was there too. You would have been there. Anybody else? Oh, consumer as well. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so what? I've just well, all I remember because it was raised that that it was put on temporary because of all the concerns. Well, actually, it was put on temporary as much as anything because it was just to see how it was a normal practice for something that was actually potentially a temporary building, and then the roundhouse was being granted permanent anyway. And I think this is, as Councillor Brazil has said, I think this is one of those really unusual but really important things that we have in this area. It's the kind of thing that brings people to the area. It's part of our, apart from being obviously a very important local offer, it's also part of our tourism offer. And I think that it provides a real service, and I think it not just that, it provides a real social service. And with COVID, I mean, that picture that was shown of the jazz party was possibly during COVID. I don't know whether it was during we were or weren't allowed out, but it probably wasn't the Boris party. And does that change the permissions and what's allowed? But I do think that it's sometimes it's really hard to quantify how important some of these facilities are. And looking at that shopping list, I recognise the shopping list in terms of, as I said earlier, one of the things that the youngsters that are involved in the youth group I'm involved with do and love, absolutely love, and the youth workers report back, so strongly about how important these things are for everybody, not just young people, but for the associated families and friends. So I think it's really important that we find a way to support this, and on that basis, I would actually move approval. I think it's something we want to support and keep and hopefully nurture.
I echo Councillor Brazil and Councillor Hodgson's comments. Could I ask a question? I mean, and this is probably a question, in fact, so I probably need to wait. So, no, it's fine. There is a very real concern we heard today from nearby neighbours. Is there any way, if this committee was minded to go against opposite recommendation and approve the condition around the use, particularly of the field kitchen side, that might go some way to alleviating the concerns of local residents? Maybe not through today, but through another body. Don't know.
No, I think there's two things. Again, I'm sure I'll be interrupted to my right if I get this not quite right. The Section 73 will in effect grant a new standalone permission, and any conditions that are still relevant, the original permission will be reimposed onto this permission. So things that wouldn't be relevant, so things like commence within 5 years, well, clearly it's been commenced, you wouldn't impose, but any other conditions that are still relevant from the original permission will be imposed. I also think that you can impose conditions, new conditions, on elements that are new from the variation. So if you wanted to impose a condition, for argument's sake, on how late at night the field kitchen could operate, then yes, I believe you could put an hours of the use operation on the field condition of the field kitchen. So the elements that are coming forward now that weren't on the original permission, then yes, I think you can condition on. What you can't do is impose a condition on development that was already approved that is more onerous than conditions you put on originally. Setting that to one side, things like noise nuisance is also covered by completely different legislation than planning. So if there's a noise nuisance, then that's also for environmental health to look at under statutory nuisance. And there is, at any time, there is an out of hours office, an out of hours number to call if there is a noise nuisance, and the authority is obliged to investigate. So there's two prongs to that. Firstly is, yes, I think you can put restrictive condition on the hours of operation of field picketing. But noise nuisance is covered by is also covered by other legislation. Does that help?
No, it does, and I think the second point is very valid. I don't think the noise pollution idea is not a material planning consideration, because that is for another body to enforce were there to be issues.
Yes, you're right in terms of it is a different set of legislation. However, I also don't think that planning decisions can hide behind that. So for argument's sake, I won't use a different example. If someone came in for, I don't know, a nightclub in the middle of a residential area, they wanted to be open till 4 o'clock in the morning, I don't think you could say, oh, it's fine from planning because any noise nuisance would be covered by environmental health. You'd have to look at it as, well, does that use in itself, is that in itself going to be a nuisance, and therefore you'd refuse it on the basis it's an inappropriate location for that particular use because of likely noise and disturbance. So I accept what I agree with what you're saying, but there are going to be examples where planning system would also clearly take that into account, because obviously impact on neighbours is a material planning consideration.
And that's what I'm trying to look to go some way towards alleviating it. Thank you. And how other members feel about it.
Would a dawn to dusk, sort of condition be appropriate for this? Because I would imagine, given the nature of this, where they are actually trying to, to work with the environment, with nature, they would probably not want to impose on the night sky anyway. I don't know, but I'm assuming that either way, a dawn to dusk would actually limit between. Obviously, in the summer that's quite long hours anyway, but it's not. At least it's not like 11 or 12 at night, lights and noise spreading out.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I agree with my colleague on my left with everything that he said. What I would say is that if you're thinking of any conditions that you might impose, further additional conditions, then they need to satisfy the 6 tests. Those of assessment being necessary, relevant to planning, relevant to the development permitted, enforceable, precise, and reasonable in all respects. I think the difficulty with a dawn to dusk condition type condition is that it varies from day to day, and it also requires you to have either the right type of watch which tells you when it's dusk, because there are those that, or well, the problem is that dusk is a period, isn't it? It's not a precise cutoff. So I think if you were minded to go down that route, I would encourage you to go with something that's a little more precise than dawn to dusk, and that doesn't rely on charts and tables, clever pieces of electronic wizardry.
Councillor Reid.
Well, I know down at B Sands,
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
I'm not allowed to say it, but they were very strict. At 10 o'clock,
Yeah.
it was out the door, and respect your residents and go home quietly. And everybody used to take that on board, and we didn't mind. We knew what the rules were, and it seemed it worked. And 10 o'clock.
I'm trying to think of the names of site, but I know exactly where you mean, but there are some people living quite close to it. But on this site, I know what the site is, and I visited one of the original ones again, permission for this before it was formed. Now, I've been involved with the AONB, I said that correctly, Councillor Brown, that I'm not one of these that wants to protect it to the end and end and end. I want people to be able to come and enjoy it. And much as I know some neighbours, if we can mitigate some of the neighbours' problems, that, you know, to encourage young children to come out to the countryside like this and see the countryside of all, you know, sorts. I mean, it's brilliant because we don't do enough of that. And I know Councillor Brazil and I've talked about that in general terms before. We need to get more people out, and this is one of them, and I've forgotten the one that Vincent that you mentioned, Councillor Reid. And you know, thank you for bringing it up because there are things like that, and I think it's something we need to do. It needs to be done carefully and make that quite clear. So, Councillor Thomas, you were going towards having an idea of what you wanted to say or not. I mean,
No, I don't know, Chairman, because you know, ordinarily, if it's different, if there's a license, if there's a pre-existing, you know, drinks license or food license, then you know the sort of timescales you're thinking about. And if you're thinking about looking at the variation condition, the applicant says we're requesting for a variation of condition 5 to enable the business to develop its field kitchen catering service. And talking about shelter for al fresco dining enterprises. So I was thinking that would cover on a campsite. It would cover certainly breakfast, lunch, and probably some sort of dinner. And so you're talking about, in my mind, sometimes between 7:30 in the morning and probably no later than maybe 9:30 at night as an absolute maximum. You can go 10 o'clock if you like. I mean, I don't mind it, but I'm just trying to think about what would be a realistic and reasonable timescale across, because presumably if you're then having a wedding, you can apply separately to licensing for a tenant's notice, and that would be a different procedure, presumably. Well, it might be getting complicated, but the reality is that's if you provide this sort of service, you open up the full gambit of council services, don't you?
Licensing, as members will know, licensing isn't necessarily my specialist subject. My understanding on a tenant's notice is that it's either you apply for a license because you haven't already got a license there, or it's a one-off diversion from your license. What that doesn't do is that doesn't then set aside planning condition. So if you've got if there's a planning condition saying that the operation shall cease at 10 o'clock at night, then applying for a tenant's notice to go till, I don't know, 12 o'clock, midnight, doesn't deal with that planning condition, and there would still be a breach of that planning condition because the licensing and the licensing regime, planning regimes are two completely different, two separate things. So you're right in terms of licensing, but there would, if the committee imposed a restrictive condition on the time, every time that was breached, there would be a breach of that condition. The TENS license doesn't, or any license under that doesn't set aside the planning condition.
I want to ask the applicant a question now, because I want to know what I want to know, Mr. Chairman, through you. I want to know whether is this a campsite that has daytime services for children and other communities, or is this a campsite that aspires to hold wedding parties? Because they're very different things, aren't they?
no, that one thing, and I'll say this, that concerns me is how many times you could have a private party. Board member, can you help us out?
Well, I was just going to say that we're talking about the field kitchen here, and that's a specific activity within that. And if there was a restriction that said it had to have done its business by 10 o'clock, that would be the field kitchen. The truth of the matter is there may be people in their yurts sitting around after that. So it's not like 10 o'clock, that's lights out. It's 10 o'clock, it's lights out in the field kitchen. So I don't know whether, it's a condition. If we put 10 o'clock, if the applicant doesn't like it, then no doubt we'll have another variation. But I think that is a good compromise.
Well, I think we're in a situation that some of us like the actual concept, but we also want that concept working in a manner that is not going to cause too much grief to neighbours late at night. Anybody that complains to me about children making a noise during the day, forget it, because it's not going to get any sympathy, because we're all children, states and we all make them. But we have to have have a compromise that works both ways, and it's coming up that problem. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, we seem to be going a little bit in circles now. But I think 10 o'clock is a reasonable time to stop noise, which would alleviate some of the worries from the village. Looking at it, I mean, it's not untidy. It looks to me as if it's a really tidy, well kept area, and if it supplies some short-time jobs or whatever for people with disabilities, that's brilliant, because there's not enough of that around. So I think I would support a 10 o'clock finish on that one. I mean,
Well, she's got to accept the 10 o'clock, and it hasn't been seconded.
I'll say that quick, don't worry.
So just before, vote, can again, because we haven't gone through the original permission, just to be clear on what conditions we moved across, and there's now a separate condition to draft. Make sure that everyone's happy with that. I suggest that before we vote that it is approval against officer recommendation, a delegated approval against officer recommendation, with the conditions to be agreed by the proposer, the secretary, the chair, and the vice chair, to make sure everyone's happy with the conditions of the decisions issued.
Mr. Fairburn, you happy with that?
Yes, Chairman.
Right. Okay, everybody understand what we're voting for? This is against the officer's recommendation with an addition.
Sorry, Chairman, did we have a seconder for it? Oh, yeah, well,
Well, I've got a nod over there.
okay, so Councillor Taylor.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. I thought he'd already done it, but never mind. Okay, do we understand what we're voting for? Against the officer's recommendation with an additional condition and it be formalised by
Delegate to be,
yeah.
conditions to be agreed by the proposer, so conditions to be agreed by councillors Hodgson, Taylor, Foss, and
Is it without variation?
absolutely, it's without,
Yes.
yeah.
Right, okay. I'm sure hands in favour of that. That, I believe, is unanimous. Thank you. Right, Mr. Wyler, I think we've got some other business to do at the other end, we're not. Where are we? Yeah, I'll give you a second, but I'll give you a second to get down to this one. Planning appeals update. Oh. Hmm? Well,
Two applications working unanimously against the thing.
it's nothing personal.
Members, there are a number of appeals to go through. On some of the householder ones, I had done got some slides to show, so images if you want to, but given that it's 4:45, whether you want me to do that or whether you just want me to do a quick summary, then you can have a look yourself. So I'll. Okay.
So we have a quick summary and you perhaps send us all the slides?
Well, I'm more than happy for you to have a look at them yourselves, because they'll just take an images from the website as the other. I have to say from a purely personal point of view, it is quite disappointing that I'm reporting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, nine appeals, of which we've lost 7, although I think 5 of them from one inspector. There's a few phrases that keeps coming up in those, and I'm thinking that it's possibly a little bit against the grain compared to other inspectors. So the first one was Rose Cottage, Bickley. This is a site that's been in front of you guys on more than one occasion. I can distinctly remember former Councillor Hitchens bringing this to us on more than one occasion. It's had previous appeals dismissed for dwelling on the site. It's had then a appeal dismissed for subdivision into 2. I think they then thought, how can we get around this? Oh, we'll get a certificate for a mobile home for incidental use. And then they're coming for an application for to use that chalet stroke mobile home as a holiday let. There are effectively 5 issues. It was a bit of a strange decision because you wouldn't normally go into matters of detailed design, etc., on a caravan application, because it's normally a change of use and it's a caravan. But I think the application was so fused, wasn't clear whether it was actually a mobile home as in it was a building or a mobile home as it was a caravan. But at the end of the day, there was inadequate information on design, ecology, drainage. The inspector basically said the previous appeal decision concluded that highway safety were an unacceptable impact here. I have looked at it afresh, but I completely agree with my previous colleague. How they thought they'd get one inspector to disagree with another on highway safety, and it's an unacceptable location or unsustainable location. Probably for me, the most interesting and possibly groundbreaking, if that's the right phrase, the application at 4th Street in Abbott, the appeal at 4th Street at Abbott Gifford. It's very interesting because it really sets the tone between the tensions that we're all coming up against, again, with sort of climate change and the needs of EV charging points and protection of built heritage. So in this case, the application was to demolish the wall and railings within the conservation area, allow parking off street, allow the occupants to have an electric car charging point directly in front of the house. The inspector accepted that the appeal property in its disposition didn't follow the normal grain locally. A cracking statement this, but this quirk in the street scene does add positively to the character and appearance of the conservation area. And the removal of the road railings, the relocation of the parking vehicle directly in front of the dwelling would cause harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. The inspector recognised the needs for EV charging, but said it may need greater collective public or private initiatives because it is clear that convenience of charging, the sustainability merits that go with that, should not automatically trump character and appearance and value of a heritage asset. So I think I think we're more likely to get more of those in the future, where there's going to be a number of balancing acts coming forward. There's going to be, Councillor Hodgson raised earlier, a very valid point about the design of passive house design, because of what it's trying to achieve or what it needs to achieve. That design cannot readily follow local vernacular. So there is without doubt in my mind, it's a personal thing. There's no doubt in my mind, the design of buildings will change. It will have to change to reflect what we need to take on board or what needs to be taken on board, both in terms of climate change, biodiversity, and the changes to the building regs. It's going to make a difference to how buildings design, how buildings look. And then we've got similar scenarios around things like either EV charging points or provision of PV, provision of renewables, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. They're all new, and it's a way. It's going to be. There's always a challenge to how that develops into design But there are going to have to be some changes for us to move forward and hit those challenges that are clearly in front of us and we've got to do. So I think the answer here is right. I think that there needs to be, we need to think outside the box how we're going to get community charging points in conservation areas or near conservation areas so it doesn't completely ruin and an appearance of historic areas. Oh yeah, absolutely. We I think we might be getting to a solution in terms of PV on the roof in conservation areas because I know that it's conversations I've had with heritage officers recently. My understanding is that the efficiency of solar slates is now is getting better all the time. But you can now get you can either put areas of slate on the roof that are actually PV slates, or there also are systems. If you go back a long time ago, everyone was talking about conservation roof lights where Velux did a conservation roof light that fitted flush with the roof rather than being crowned. Well, there are now, my understanding, there are now solar panels that you get that now fit flush with the roof being on top. So I think technology is very important. You're absolutely right about EV charging, street lamp charging points. The only issue we can have in some of the South Hams conservation areas, and I'm thinking of Stoke Gable in particular, where you've got villages that conservation areas that don't have street lighting. So that'll be a slightly different challenge. I honestly don't know whether Avon Gifford's got street lighting or not in the conservation area. It's not a village I know well enough to know whether it's got street lighting. I think the main road definitely has, but I don't know whether in the conservation has. Okay, but you're right. But there needs to be a greater push for that, isn't there? Yeah, and that is it is the challenge, isn't it? Well, and that absolutely. There's department. Yeah, you just say bollards. The next one is the two dwellings at Hemerdon. If anything, this is one of the two I'm probably most disappointed in. So I hand on heart think the inspector's got this one wrong. What the inspector essentially concluded was that as the site was in close proximity to the edge of Plymouth, it's okay because you don't have to drive it because Plymouth has a wealth of facilities for occupants of the dwellings. They wouldn't have to travel long distances on a regular basis, and therefore considered it was accepted in principle. I think the inspectors missed the point that Hemerdon is very poorly served by alternative forms of transport, and that this is clearly contrary to it's clearly contrary to policy. Now, as a team of officers, we've sat down with Phil Baker on this one, considered this. I think there are lessons to be learned, and I think we need to be far more clever and far more specific on how we present JLP evidence to the inspector in these types of application, and don't give them the opportunity to misinterpret. So I think we need to absolutely spell it out. This is contrary to the policy because of, let me be absolutely clear why. So it's a disappointing one. We then get on to a raft of householder appeals that were all determined by Mr. Crammond. 5 Whittington Road, Youngton. For our point of view, the main issue was the impact on the character and appearance of the host property. We felt that it would have an adverse impact because scale, mass and design. And the Whittington Road, this is the one up by Colton Cross, isn't it? It's the MOD. Yeah, the MOD site. And we took the view that it's a simple, the original dwelling is a really simple form. And that would just be completely obscured and the additions would lack coherence. The inspector started off by saying that he agreed that having an extension on 3 sides would change the appearance of the dwelling. So that's a starting point for being contrary to the SPD. But the remodelling of a home rather than slavish subordination can at times be justified, and this is one such case. So, and he didn't consider that a construction management plan was necessary. I mean, this is completely contrary to the neighbour plan. Yes, there's a trend going to start here about, yes, it's gone, but it's fine. So the next one, we then move to probably the Salcombe ward for the next few, isn't it? So we've got old 11 old rectory gardens, loft conversion fundamentally. With officers considered that scale, massing, materials was poor design. The raising the ridge and the additional dormer was detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the area, including A and B. The inspector, again, Hammond, scale of the change is modest and the combined massing would look comfortable within its generous landscape setting. And he's satisfied that the scheme sat in its prevailing topography, built context and landscape setting, and would preserve the aesthetic qualities of the A and B. I'm not sure that the board members would necessarily agree with that assessment, but absolutely. Then we move on to Herbert Road in Salcombe, Mr. Crammond again. This was alterations and effectively a reconstruction of the first floor, and it was effectively doing reverse living. So we felt that it was an incongruous addition to the host dwelling, and it would create significant more overlooking from the first floor, because the first floor suddenly became the living rooms rather than bedrooms. Again, he goes off in the right direction. The inspector agreed that the planned works would radically change the appearance of the existing house and it would become largely unrecognisable. So you're thinking, happy days. However, the inspector felt it legitimate to take a step back and set the existing structure aside and consider this significant remodelling as if it were a new build and assess accordingly, and therefore is acceptable. And there's no additional overlooking because there's already a balcony there. After it was, yes, there is already a balcony there from a bedroom. You said it becomes a living room, therefore clearly there's more overlooking. Now, the old, and then probably in many ways the worst one of the lot. And I would ask members to look at, if you don't look at anyone, look at this one. Charnwood at Marlborough. Which is, if you look at old-fashioned design guides, you'll see this is what not to do. And you have these big box dormers on bungalows. That would have a big red X across it. I think the architect actually copied one of those and made the application. And then, so we've got this big box dormer, and obviously we were saying scale, massing, design is harmful, including the element, the amount of new glazing in the ANOB.
Actually, does he start off agreeing with us again?
So the inspector that the current dwelling is unremarkable. On such occasions, I see it as reasonable to move away from the normal approach of matching what is there and looking at the larger picture of remodelling, the phrase that obviously he likes. In this case, the building is not a representation of its surroundings. the dormer would be large, greater than many greater than many one might normally seek to achieve. But in this immediate and wider context, the design of the dormer and other changes will be a suitable solution to providing increased and improved accommodation and updating a property which is presently an anomaly. That's it. So he concluded that it complies with policy and doesn't cause any harm. When you've got a neighbourhood plan that fundamentally says it should be subservient and should match it, and he just looked at the policy and said, I know the policy and it complies. I for the life of me, I cannot see how he considered this to be compliant. I really don't. The next one I'm not too concerned about because it's a non-determination appeal. I don't know that the case officer is no longer with us. I don't know the details of whether we were of it. It's I think we were. So yeah, so it was basically change of design of 8 lodges were approved, 4 been built, and it's just changed the design of the other 4 Kingsbridge. So I don't think that was not what's like that. Yeah. I think, yeah, and then finally, Viper's Key at Ditzer was a certificate of lawful proposed development. And the issue is simply, was what they're preparing, proposing, was it repairs or was it development that needed plan? Officers took the view, and I've read through what they've done, I would have come to the same conclusion. Officers took the view that it was repairs. Inspector concluding, officer took the view it was more than repairs and it needed an application. The inspector concluded that it was repairs, but I think this is key. But in my view, much of this was clarified with the appeal documents. So I think there was plans didn't tally on the application. Some that said you could read it that the whole thing was going to be removed and rebuilt, and others were saying it was not as extensive as that. So there was a disparity. I think they clarified that in the appeal. And looking at now what the plans show, well, I agree with the inspector that it's repairs, but I think based on the information in front of us, I think the decision was the correct decision to make. It's just they provided more information in the appeal. Yeah. We should be, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wondered really about that one, because if surely that means that when we validate a planning application, we should be certain that we have all the information, make a determination. Because I know sometimes, for example, not here, but like at town council, which I'm on that planning, though I don't vote. Sometimes it's quite clear there's just not information adequate to actually, and of course the officer isn't there to ask. But it just feels that that's maybe something we should be maybe being a little bit more tighten up on. I mean, I know we've got quite a turnover of officers. It's a bit of a challenge, but I just think that's something that's really quite important, because I mean, this has obviously cost us money, but it needn't have done.
Wouldn't say it's necessarily cost us money. There was no costs application. I think I would agree with you in terms of planning applications. Applications for certificates, either existing or proposed law development, are slightly different in that it's the onus is on the applicant to provide us evidence on the balance of probability that it's either been there for 4 or 10 years or it doesn't require consent. If they don't provide the evidence, the onus on us is to determine the application on the basis of that evidence in front of us. So that there's a slight, I think there's more than a slight difference between planning applications and applications for certificates. We are the onus on us to determine it on the basis of the evidence they're provided to us. On planning applications, yes, we should be, and I think we are, since members adopted the new validation checklist. I think we are being a lot tighter on what's coming in, and we are also absolutely now in accordance with the charter that members also agreed. applications are being determined based on the information that's been submitted. When I say that, I mean, we're not giving people 2, 3, 4 chances to keep changing plans, because I think that just confuses everybody, potentially officers, but certainly parish councils, members, members of the public. It's incredibly difficult to keep on top of what's the most recent plan if they keep coming in. So any applications that have come in recently, we're not accepting fundamental changes during the application process. And I still make, and I do. The leader would say I've been taken down that route, kicking and screaming, but I do now definitely see the merits of that, because I think certain agents were taking liberties. It's the right move. Sorry, Councillor, does that answer your question? Sorry, with the major report, I generally speaking answer any questions that there are, rather than do a presentation on all of them. That's.
I was going to say that was like, I agreed with that, not this last one.
With respect, actually, I can't take it off if you agreed it. I can only take it off if I need to write applicant to either withdraw it or for them to say, no, we're not progressing on 106, and then I can file it away for purposes only. But it has to be in conjunction with the applicant, and I haven't done that yet. It's the delay is entirely with me. It's just finding time to do it. There's it's if you recall, there were issues around own ownership that had to be resolved before they could. So the last time I had a conversation with Charlotte, that she thinks they're nearly there. It's regularisation. It was that one plot, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't pick up on it today, but I noticed that I forgot to mention that the garden, to pick up on, which is.
I'll chase Charlotte for those, but my understanding is thereabouts. It's all to do with them being able to sign the agreement once they go down.
No, there's some clarification, please. It's on this, what we were talking about. Richard and I both had letters from the applicant's legal team demanding them to go to committee. We haven't had a decision from Annie yet, so they can't force us to pay the committee. It's just an interesting.
Can I defer that question until we're no longer streaming? Because I think there needs to be a legal discussion here, and I think ought to be outside of the public domain.
Yeah, it's not on these actual things that we've just been looking at, but one of the things that, as I've asked before, in terms of how I raised it when we had the peer review, how much I was interviewing.
Can I be really rude and interrupt? If it's not about an agenda item, and we close the meeting, stop streaming, and then have the discussion?
Okay, but it has a public element to it. And what I was going to say was, I have asked if where we have the layout of the online portal, it's all just one like great long stream of kind of listings of everything that's come in, and it's actually quite difficult to pick out what's objections, which on the county one and other local planning authorities, they separate it out, so you've got a tab, so you can just tab onto all the objections if you want to read them, and the support letters, and then maybe the stakeholder reports. But particularly that one that we had this morning, with so many letters of objection, it's really hard to kind of go through and pick out the relevant extra reports. And I just think that's something that we should be thinking about. Like, as I say, I know it's been raised by members of the public as well, because they just give up trying to find things.
Current IT system on website can't do that. As a result, we are looking at have been for a while moving to an alternative software with DM, and that once that's up and running, that will be able to split into, I think it's 3 tabs. I think it's submission. It's either 2 tabs, but I think it's submission, letters of representation and then statutory consultation here that that's absolutely in the spec for the new systems and very much so.
I better go on the mic, hadn't I? Yeah, okay. Well, I'll formally close the meeting, right?
Okay.